Good afternoon, everybody who is joining us live at the RM EduSummit 21. For those on catch-up, hello. So on the day that it's predicted that the government will make an announcement about the online harms bill in the Queen's speech this afternoon, I'm delighted that we are joined by Kate Edwards, who is Senior Manager for Child Safety Online, and Helen Westerman, who's the Head of Local Campaigns, both from the NSPCC. Kate and Helen are going to talk to us about the impact of the pandemic on children's online safety and the great resources available to help enable parents and carers when addressing this issue. This is a discussion session, so whilst they will be presenting information, we are very keen to take questions from the audience, and you should see a Q&A box in the bottom right of your screen. Please post your question, and at the end of their session, we will come to those questions and look to Kate and Helen to answer them. But without further ado, I'd now like to hand over to Kate.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Simon. Good afternoon, everyone. And hello, it's lovely to be with you here this afternoon to talk a little bit around how we support parents and carers in particular to help keep children safe online. Helen and I both work with parents and carers at the NSPCC and specifically in the area of keeping children safe online. I'm a former primary school teacher myself and worked for a number of years in primary schools, specifically around online safety, and I've been in the charity sector for the last 6 years working in this field as well. Just to give you a flavour of what we're going to cover in the session, so as you've just heard, we're going to talk about the impact of the pandemic. We're going to look at what we've learned from parents and carers and young people themselves who've contacted us at the NSPCC and the resources that we have available. Now, some of the things that we're going to talk about during this session can be quite difficult to talk about and can be quite challenging to hear about as well. So it's really important that you all take care of yourselves. Take a break if you need to, watch this later on catch up, reach out to colleagues or family members afterwards if you need to have a conversation. And we'll also have the details of the NSPCC helpline at the end, if anything during this presentation triggers any concerns for you about the children that you work with specifically as well. So we're just going to begin by touching upon children and young people's use of the internet, as recently we've had the latest annual data from Ofcom. Now, as you can see from the slides on the screen, 1 in 3 internet users worldwide is now a child. And young people are using technology younger and younger and having access to their own personal devices much younger as well. And the pandemic has had a real impact here as well. We've seen children who maybe previously only used a family device or a device at school or another family member's house, suddenly now being given access to their own devices. So you can see here just over half of 5 to 7-year-olds have their own tablet, with 14% of them now having their own smartphone as well. 44% of 8 to 11-year-olds are using social media, and I'm sure many of you here attending today know the age requirements for many social media sites is 13 years old, so that's quite a significant statistic to take account of. 6 in 10 children own their own mobile phone, and 91% of 12 to 15-year-olds are using messaging apps. So with all of that in mind and the challenges that we've had over the last year, it's no wonder that you can see that parents have found it increasingly difficult to manage their child's screen time during lockdown. Now, just a quick note on screen time. You may have heard of the term screen time, but you may have also heard of the term screen use. Two different terms. Screen time is obviously how long you spend on a device. Screen use is what you do. At the NSPCC, we tend to focus more on screen use because children can experience risks even when online for only a short amount of time. And it's often what they're doing that poses the greater risk as opposed to how long they're spending online. So we are going to delve into the impact that the pandemic has had more specifically on children's lives online. Now, it's been a real tale of two halves because the internet has been in many ways fantastic over the last year. It has helped give us a kind of virtual sense of normality. It's allowed us to keep in contact with our loved ones and for children to keep learning and keep entertained, keep busy, keep active. It has been a wonderful, wonderful platform for that, and it would have been quite a different year without it. However, there's been very significant risk for children over the last year as well. We've seen obviously children's routines have changed, the amount of time they're spending online, what they might be accessing, but also the types of apps they're using. You know, at the start of the pandemic, we suddenly saw children needing to access conferencing apps, for example, things that they would never have previously used, and those platforms themselves not necessarily having safety settings in place specific to children. Now, during this time, we have seen an increase in reports of people accessing child sexual abuse material online. And we've seen this reported from Europol, the EU Law Enforcement Agency, and from the Internet Watch Foundation and the National Crime Agency here in the UK. And in fact, recently, the Internet Watch Foundation has reported that they blocked around 8.8 million attempts by UK users to access child sexual abuse material online during the lockdown months. Now, this increased demand for this content, young people spending more time online, and platforms themselves having limited resource to monitor what is happening on their platforms, has made for a perfect storm for children to be abused whilst they're accessing the internet. Now, we've been hearing from adults and we've been hearing from young people throughout the pandemic, specifically about online risks. And I'm going to touch upon some of those insights now. Now, in terms of helpline contacts, so our helpline is for any adult who has concerns about a young person, and we've seen a 60% increase in the amount of adults who have contacted the helpline specifically about online sexual abuse. You can see the types of things here that they are talking to us about. So concerns about children themselves not always recognising when a conversation may be abuse, or somebody who might be misleading them. We have had them discuss with us quite sophisticated systems being used by perpetrators, and I'm going to go on to those in a couple of slides' time. We've also heard about specifically children being targeted and exploited to obtain images of them. Now, this has been quite a common theme throughout contacts we've had to the helpline, and children being exploited where families perhaps are in financial difficulties, but children are still wanting to be able to buy the latest thing. So being offered money, gift cards, e-gift cards, in-game money or items in exchange for intimate images or videos or live streams of themselves. And finally, we've seen a lot of adults contacting us concerned about changes in children's behaviour, which can often indicate that there is something wrong. So perhaps spending more time online, being more secretive about what they're doing online, or using sexually or developmentally inappropriate language or behaviour as well. Now, you can see here from on the right hand side, this is a quote from a mother who contacted the NSPCC helpline during the pandemic, who was concerned about an app that her child was using called Rec Room, and I will touch upon apps again in a few slides' time. Concerned about the conversations she was seeing her child having with different people on those apps, and the conversations becoming very sexual in nature, and encouraging the child to go off and look at other sexual content elsewhere online, so pornographic content, perhaps not available through the app or through the game itself. Now, from children, because we do obviously support children through our Childline service, so there we've seen an 11% increase in the number of counselling sessions about online sexual abuse. Many children have been talking to us about how the loneliness and isolation, or that boredom factor over lockdown, has led them to be seeking out new contact online, seeking out support, trying to find others to have conversations with. And we've seen different apps have their sort of moment during lockdown, if you like, and there's been some apps available for some time that they're certainly not new, but there's been many cases reported again of young people starting to use them. So things like Chat Roulette and Omegle, which are services that connect you live to another person online via video chat in order to have a conversation. These sorts of apps can pose huge risks to young people in terms of who they're speaking to, what that person might say or do, and what they can see whilst they're online. Now, unsurprisingly, we've had a lot of contact from young people who have been using different apps, games, sites for the very first time during the pandemic. It may be that, as the quote from the 12-year-old girl on the side of the screen suggests, having not used something like social media before, but finding a real need for it during the pandemic, wanting to stay in contact with friends and family, wanting to see what's going on in the world and what other people are sharing. We have heard from children reports of being approached on different platforms as well, a variety of different spaces. And this is really important to be aware of as a professional. Whenever you're talking to children and young people, talk to them about the range of platforms that they might be using, because this kind of contact and abuse does happen across any platform that exists online. So young people have spoken to us about social media sites, they've spoken to us about instant messaging apps, live streaming platforms, and gaming as well, as all being places where they have been approached by somebody online and spoken to for sort of sexual purposes. And children often talked about multiple platforms being used by abusers as well, it not being one place that a conversation would happen. And this is quite a common tactic that's used by abusers online. Perhaps the initial approach might be made via a game, but conversations will quickly move on to more private spaces. So whether that's a social media platform with a private direct message, or a messaging app, something like WhatsApp, could be a common place where these types of things do happen. Now, I've mentioned some of the different tactics that are used, and I just wanted to highlight some of these here. Now, they won't be new ones, I'm sure, to many of you on the call, but I just wanted to highlight some examples of how these have played out over the last year for young people. So on the left-hand side, these are some of the main tactics used by perpetrators to groom children and young people online, using the same sites as them and changing their identity are quite common ones that people are familiar with. But often it might be the case that somebody doesn't mask their identity or their age at all. They do stick to their true identity, but they may instead pretend to be an authority figure, a mentor, a celebrity. There will be a lot of advice given, support, attention, flattering, that type of thing, and perhaps the purchasing of gifts as well. Important to note that those gifts might not always be really high value. Sometimes they can be quite low value, and virtual gifts as well, perhaps through a game. Now, you can see the two contacts we've had here, one from a boy age 13 and one from a girl age 14, who both contacted the Childline service throughout the pandemic. The young boy was invited into a gaming server and given extra responsibility, and that was really how that trusting relationship was built up, by making that boy feel important, giving him that extra responsibility. And then that conversation moved off the game and it moved on to a third-party site called Netflix Party, which allows you to watch videos at the same time. And as you can see from the end of that quote, the content that they were then watching together was quite explicit and meant for an adult audience. For the young girl, this is an example of where we've seen young people being sexually exploited over the last year for their own images and videos of themselves. A young girl who was really wanting to be like her friends, wanting to have the latest clothes, but didn't feel like she could ask her parents because of how they were struggling financially with the impact of the pandemic, but then was offered by somebody online to sell images of herself. Now, I've mentioned a few different apps and games just there on those slides, and these are kind of the main ones that have come up quite a lot for us in the past year, whether that's through the Helpline or Childline, or through conversations with colleagues working directly with young people. Some of these you will recognise, some may be brand new and you may be looking at them thinking, my goodness, what are all of these things? Some of these are examples of games, so things like Rec Room, Among Us, Fall Guys. Some of them are chat sites, video chat, Zoom, Teams, or anonymous chatting sites linking you up very quickly, things like Omegle as well. Now, all of these different apps that you can see here on the screen, we have reviewed and we've put the latest safety advice on our site NetAware. Now, if you've never come across NetAware before, this is our website that we have co-created with our partners at O2. This will give you the expert safety ratings, the age recommendations, the top tips, the how to set up the settings properly on different devices, you name it. We've got it all there for all of those apps and around 65 others off the top of my head currently on NetAware. So please do have a look at NetAware yourselves. It's been specifically written for parents and carers, so a really easy one to share with parents and carers if you're having those different services come up in conversations with young people. NetAware does as well have a newsletter that you can sign up to, so you can get a monthly newsletter with the latest content in there. Now, on all of the things I've touched upon it and more, we have lots of advice about how to talk to young people about these things. What are the top tips specifically for parents or for you as professionals or for children and young people? So on our main NSPCC website, we have our online safety hub. You can see there we have advice around online games, live streaming, inappropriate or explicit content. And we also mirror that content for a child audience on our Childline website as well. I would say as professionals, also take a look at the Childline website. It can be a really, really great resource for pitching your own conversations with young people, using the right tone of voice, the right language, that type of thing. So great resources for you as professionals, but also to share with parents and carers and children that you're working with as well. Now, we do have, as well as our advice hubs, we've got some fantastic new parent workshops specific for schools, any kind of organisation to support you with educating parents about how to keep children safe. And I'm delighted to have Helen Westerman here with me today, who is part of the team that delivers these workshops, who's going to give you a bit of a flavour of them and discuss a little bit more about how you could book these for your organisation. So, Helen, I will hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Kate, and thank you for inviting us to talk to you this afternoon. As Kate said, we've been running these workshops now for a number of years, actually since 2015, when we ran them in schools, businesses, community settings. But obviously over the last year, everything's been virtual. So we've delivered, I think from March to December, to over 5,000 parents, talking with them about how to keep their child safe online through the pandemic. So we now have core content, which usually lasts for around 30 minutes. And then we've got a suite of additional topics, things like grooming, gaming, persuasive design, role model behaviour, some really good stuff there, topics that parents have said they're really interested in. So they can be offered as a separate session or as a bolt-on to the core session. So core session, 30 minutes, and then we can extend that to an hour by adding in some of the additional content to make it really bespoke for the group of parents that we're talking to. All our workshops and webinars are delivered completely free of charge. Ideally, we like a minimum of 10 parents and carers, but we don't hold too fast to that. So I'm going to take you through now some of the content that we deliver to parents and carers through the workshops. We always start with spending a couple of minutes talking to parents about what their children enjoy doing online, as well as what the parents enjoy doing online. And then we move on to talk about some of the risks associated with some of those activities. So now you're going to see a short film featuring some parents talking about their concerns for what their children may be doing online, but also how they mitigate for some of those risks.
Differently.
I do worry about the children's locations being identified through their apps and games.
It can be quite difficult to keep up to date with all the different changes in keeping certain apps safe. I think if you're not techie yourself, it can be a little bit complicated.
A major concern of mine is that he'll derive self-worth through social media, and therefore if a post doesn't get the response that it wants, or even worse, it gets criticised, or he somehow feels humiliated by his friends or strangers, I feel that could have a real negative impact on his development.
I worry about my children on social media, just any outside influences, anything that's inappropriate that I wouldn't want them seeing, or any contact from people that they don't know.
People contacting her out of the blue, people pretending to be somebody else.
My ultimate fear is that they will be groomed by somebody that they don't know online.
The greatest worry is that she becomes easily led by that person, and they may, they talk her into doing things that she shouldn't do.
we have parental control set over the Wi-Fi. So they cannot access everything that's out there online at the moment.
I'm really conscious about being in the room when they're playing. So the computer isn't in their bedroom, it's in our living room. So when they're playing, I can kind of hear what they're doing.
I try and say to the children, show me how this works, you know, sort of thing, so that I can get an idea that if I do need to access that or figure out something, I'm able to understand it a little bit as well.
I talk to my children a lot to try and keep them safe, and I just make them aware of the dangers, really.
It's difficult, and I think sometimes you have to pitch those conversations differently for the different ages. But yeah, we do talk about it, and they talk between themselves as well.
There we are. We show the video, and then parents talk about their own concerns about what their child might be doing. And we then bracket those risks under 3 headings. So you might know them as the 3 C's: the content, conduct, context, but we're talking about who they chat to, what they see, and what they share. And as Kate said at the beginning, it's not about the amount of time necessarily that the child or young person spends online. We know that the risk lies in actually what they're doing. So who they're chatting to. We know that children are chatting to all sorts of people online. It's really easy to connect, and they could connect with people at any time. Ideally, they're communicating with people that they know, particularly when they're young. But realistically, we know that as children get older, they may look to meet new people online, perhaps someone who shares a common interest in a hobby or a sport, or to explore their identity. Some of the key risks in relation to who they're chatting to relate to grooming and cyberbullying. As we know, grooming is when an adult deliberately establishes that emotional connection, builds trust with a child for the purposes of sexually exploiting them. And cyberbullying is bullying that takes place online and that really follows a child wherever they go. We know that the 24/7 nature of this can be really damaging to children. We then talk about what children are seeing. So those innocent searches can often lead to not so innocent results, which children might go looking for, they might stumble across, they might be sent something or shared something by friends. Obviously, online content can be shared widely, as well as adults. We're just a few clicks away from inappropriate or harmful content. It's also really important to consider that what upsets one child or worries one child wouldn't necessarily upset or worry another child. And that can fluctuate almost day to day. It's really different based on the child's maturity, their understanding, their own personal circumstances. And finally, what they're sharing. So we know that children, just as adults, share lots of things online. The problem comes when it becomes oversharing. So it's not just about the sharing of personal information, the things that we tell children, not to share, where you live, which school you go to, etc. But it's also about the sharing of pictures, messages, images, videos that might be sexual in nature. It's important to reiterate to our children and young people that this is against the law, and to remind a child that whenever they share something like that, even if they think they're sharing it one-to-one or privately, that there's no such thing as private really, and it could be forwarded on. So, we know, and you all know through your work in schools, that when children are sharing images of themselves or others, the effects can be really significant and devastating. We also talk to parents and carers about how to spot the signs that something isn't right for their child online. Children may not know what's happening to them online is abuse, or may simply want to keep it private. So abuse is often discovered and not disclosed. Signs might not always be obvious. For example, a child might not be upset that they've been contacted by somebody that they didn't know. It could be really flattering. It might make them feel good about themselves. And as Kate said at the beginning, during the pandemic, we heard increasingly from children who were feeling lonely. Children and young people go through changes all of the time growing up. But as we say to parents, if there's something that feels unusual, seems a bit out of character for your child or young person, it's really important to try to talk to them. Obviously, they'll know their child best, but if their outgoing child suddenly becomes very introverted or secretive, they might want to explore this with them. Some children may cover up the signs to protect themselves or the parents. So again, the advice is to try to talk with them routinely. We have fun with this slide during our workshops, and we usually, if we're in a room together, we ask parents to kind of get up and move around to say where they are on this continuum, really. And there's no stigma about being at either end of the spectrum. This is about getting parents to really think about their type of parenting and how they parent their child online. And I think what we're here to talk about is, you know, for some parents, they will say, I'm controlling, or I want to watch what my child's doing. I have the family laptop in a family space, and I check everything out. For other parents, they're very casual. Children will have devices from a very young age outside of a family space, in their own bedroom, have easy access to whatever's out there online. And this is a dialogue with parents, sharing their own thoughts and feelings about where they are and the benefits and risks of being at either end of the spectrum. We also say that, what works well for a very young child, so, perhaps as a parent, you're really managing what your child is doing online for very good reason. That doesn't necessarily work so well when you've got a teenager. So it's about trying to understand how to parent in that online space, allowing your child to grow and develop with your eyes and ears on them as they're looking and exploring new apps and games, and then slowly and carefully allowing them greater freedom so that they learn to be able to navigate their online space for themselves, but also know that they come to you or another trusted adult if something goes wrong. We talk about setting of rules and boundaries, and indeed on our website we have a family agreement template that can be really useful for families to use to help set some of those rules and boundaries, which can be flexed as the child grows and develops. I think it's really important at this point also to reiterate that parents don't need to be experts. They don't need to be tech specialists, just interested really, and playing that game of Fortnite, recording that TikTok video, maybe 2 or 3 times, can give parents a really useful insight into what their children are doing online, what they know about, how they access it, but also to see who's influencing them in that online space. So the greatest tool in the parents' toolbox is having that conversation, and this will allow them to find out what might be worrying their child and consider how they can help. And ideally, this happens from a really young age when the child starts using tech. And isn't that awkward? Let's sit down and have an online safety conversation that with your 14-year-old. Really, that's almost too late. It's the regular, small, simple conversations that you have with your child as soon as they start to use tech, and particularly as they start to use tech independently. We would always recommend by starting with the positives. So if all a child hears is the negatives about being online or being online for too long, they simply stop listening, because the rhetoric's unlikely to match their experience that they're having online. We also encourage parents to show their child or be with them when they look at how to do some of the basics to keep safe. So Kate mentioned NetAware. NetAware's got some great tips on how to report and block. It's a really good place to start if you're not sure how to do this. And we also suggest to parents that sometimes their child might not want to come to them or another adult in the family with an issue or concern, and they might want to rehearse that with an adult that they don't know so well, or indeed a staff member at Childline. Sometimes Childline can be a really good place for practicing what you want to say with a parent and carer, or just talking through an issue that you're not quite sure how mum and dad might want to respond. We've also got some really good advice on the NSPCC website for parents on how to start some of those tricky conversations, and those conversation starters can be really useful. So we know that parents can be worried about not knowing what the latest online terms or features are. So we do a quick quiz with parents that come to our session. So we used to do an app quiz showing lots of different logos and of the apps, the popular apps that children and young people are using. Now we've got this little game. I'm just going to give you a couple of seconds to look through to see if you know your snaps, your reels, your stories, your hashtag and your streaks. And my 15-year-old would be mortified at me saying those words. And I'm now going to move on to give you those definitions. So again, something fun to talk about with your child or young person. And I think what we found previously through our workshops is that parents often underestimated what their child or young person knew in terms of websites, games, words, particularly over 18 sites. Some parents were, oh no, my child would never look at that or has never seen that. And actually then you ask the child and the parent can be quite surprised by the child's response sometimes. Before we finish the core content with parents, we talk through some of the practical things that they can do to help keep their child, or whatever age, safe in that online space. So obviously we say that younger child will need greater supervision, and we encourage parents and carers to be proactive by exploring the apps and games that their child is using and making use of parental controls. With older children, we suggest to parents that they involve them in setting those rules and boundaries, or perhaps helping the parent or grandparent or younger siblings with setting up the tech. Children can often be really helpful when parent or carer gets their mobile phone and you can find out what the child knows about how to use that piece of technology. One thing that I've also done is to ask a young person, a teenager, what rules they'd keep if they became a parent themselves, and what they do differently in relation to parenting when they become a parent. And that's fascinating, because often children would be more bothered about particular aspects of online safety that we currently as parents might not have even thought about, but some of the other stuff absolutely wouldn't be worried about at all. So again, that's quite a useful conversation to have with a young person. We also suggest that parents share tips and what works with other parents, and that's really useful, particularly when we do face-to-face sessions with parents. This part of the workshop can be really useful. So a parent will say, I've tried that worked really well, didn't work at all. So that can be really helpful. We would encourage you to foster that if you've got parent groups that meet in school. So during the workshops, parents will share tips, and a couple of them I'm going to flag now. So it might be that you encourage parents to keep their child's tech out of the bedroom after lights out, with devices being charged downstairs. Many parents find that works really well if they start as they mean to go on. It could be that you've got controls on your child's device that prevents them from making in-app purchases without approving these. So we've heard some real horror stories from parents, during the lockdown, but also prior to the lockdown, of children using a device that's got mum or dad's credit, debit or PayPal details in it, and children either buying that next level of game up, or indeed a samurai sword, we heard on one occasion. Also asking your child or young person about what images they're happy for you to share on social media of them. So kids will often say to us, well, we're told not to share this, that and the other, yet parents will share pictures of us, and we'd rather that not happen. So having a conversation with your child or young person about what you share of them is also quite important. And also it could be that with a young child, you might, when they want a new game, you might want to authorize that, so they're not allowed to download that without your permission, with parental controls helping you to manage that. So coming to the end of our formal delivery now, but just in terms of how to book a workshop, as I say, they're available now completely free of charge, and at the moment are still being delivered virtually, but we're hoping as we move out of the pandemic that we can come and deliver more sessions face-to-face. We know for some parents, they do prefer the face-to-face delivery, but actually, other parents do prefer the virtual delivery, because it means that they can be based at home and not have childcare issues to attend a workshop. So as I mentioned, we've got the core content and it's live, and we've also got a pre-recorded version that we can make available to you. And then we've also got that additional content that I mentioned. And we're always looking to update that content. So if there's new materials, new topics of concern that the parents flag with us, then we talk to Kate and the team about creating new content for that, which is great, and ensures that the webinars remain agile and really current and relevant for parents. So that's come to the end of our formal presentation. Just before we finish, just a couple of numbers to flag. We've got the NSPCC helpline number there, which Kate said is there for any adult to use if you want to talk anything through, you've got concerns about a child, want to discuss child's online safety issues. And for children, obviously the Childline number there and the website. There's some great resources for children and young people on the Childline website. And if yourself can't have that conversation, sometimes it's helpful to direct children to that. So we're going to stop now. If there's any questions, I know that Kate and I are both happy to answer some. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you, Kate. That I thought was an excellent, pragmatic, right at the cutting edge of a big issue that's facing us all, both those who are parents and those who are in school. So thank you, the two of you. And again, it's good to keep that slide on the screen. We have plenty of opportunity for questions and answers. Well, we have sort of 10 minutes or so. So please do post them if you do. We have one question at the moment, and that really is around, is there increasing pressure on schools to educate children on the dangers of online harms? And linked to that, what's the best way for schools to work with parents on this?
Yeah, so we've seen changes in the curriculum most recently, I suppose, is going to have an impact on schools. Previously, the only mention really of online safety in statutory curriculum was one mention per key stage in the computing curriculum. So now we have mentions of keeping children safe online across the new RSHE curriculums and relationships and health education for primary schools as well. So there's much more opportunity to talk about some of these things during curriculum time. It's really important to make the time to talk about these things, because obviously children don't differentiate between online and offline. Even right now, us as adults, how many of us are sitting here thinking, I'm online right now? And that's a constant thought in our head. We just don't. We tend to think about the activity that we're doing, we're learning, or we're engaging, we're sharing things. And it's the same for children and young people. So I would always say that sort of online safety is a really important thing to tackle in quite a cross-curricular way. So looking for opportunities as whenever you are sort of looking at online things, whether it's for research or tackling things that are happening within the news or that kind of thing within the curriculum. Now, alongside the statutory guidance, there's also teaching online safety in schools guidance from the Department for Education as well. And that kind of gives a little bit more flesh to the bones of the curriculum and gives you a little bit more around the key things that you can teach. Alongside that is another document that you may have come across before, which is called Education for a Connected World. And this is a framework that has been written by the UK Council for Internet Safety. And the NSPCC sits on this particular group, as do many other organisations, CEOP, the UK Safer Internet Centre, for example, Barnardo's. And all of those organisations, we've come together and we've mapped out the key things that children need to learn from around the ages of, I think it's 3 going right the way up to 18, across all the different areas of how they may use the internet. So communicating relationships, taking in information, that type of thing. So there's lots of guidance out there now to help you as the curriculum changes and as there is more within it now that is compulsory to teach within schools. In terms of supporting parents with that, obviously a lot of these things can happen outside of the school environment. That's not to say that everything happens outside of the school environment. I've had many an interesting conversation with young people who have explained to me around image sharing and different conversations and things that have happened during school time. But with things happening at home as well, it's really important to provide that support to parents. And the school is often the first point of contact for many parents and the place where they get a lot of their trusted information and advice. So that's why Helen and I really wanted to share resources that you can share with parents and carers, and things like NetAware, and putting out that advice if a parent is talking to you about Roblox and they're really concerned about it, that type of thing. So it's just important to kind of drip feed that advice to them in the same way that you would with all other areas of a child's education as well.
Very good. Thank you, Kate. We have time for one last question, which builds on the slide which Melanie has said she found very, very interesting. I did as well, the 3 C's. So the question is really, do you have any very quick top tips on how to encourage a child to be more open about what they're doing if a parent finds them starting to be more guarded about their online use?
I think for me, it's my advice would always be to try and have that online safety conversation as young as possible, so it becomes part of your everyday parlance with the child. I think if it is you're trying to do that with a teenager who naturally wants to keep their online private, then that's really, really difficult to do. So if you're suddenly wanting to know, why your 15-year-old is a little bit private online, or wants to, put the laptop shut or move their phone every time you walk into the room, that could be just because they want some private time online and they don't want mum or dad looking at that. I think it's also about leaving the door open for your child or young person and saying, actually, if something's making you feel a bit uncomfortable, you've worried that you've done something and you've later come to regret that, if you come to me as a parent, we'll work on this together. So this is not about me as a parent having all the answers. This is about you saying what you would find helpful to do. I think what we hear from children is that sometimes parents jump to coming up with trying to sort it all. So as Kate said, parents will go into school to try and sort out that person's bullying my child online. The child themselves doesn't want the parent to do that and would actually like some help in terms of how they might manage that themselves. So not taking all the control away from that child or young person, particularly as they move into their teenage years, is really important. Clearly, there'll be times when, as a parent, you need to step up and be that parent. But I think in the main, it would be about regular conversations and saying to your child, okay, someone shared this image with you. What do you think we should do about that?
Very good. Thank you, Helen. I think that brings us to an end. So Helen, Kate, thank you very much indeed. As I said, I'm a parent myself and I understand and can relate to a lot of things you've said. I'm sure everybody who's been on this call can as well, in whatever role they play. So thank you for the two of you. We still have on the screen, it's just gone. We had on the screen the helplines and whatever. So please, thank you. Please do contact the NSPCC or use any of the information that's available. Within the next 48 hours, and probably actually quicker than that based on yesterday, it was normally a couple of hours, we will share with everybody on the call your attendee pack, which will contain a recording of this session. For those who are looking for it, a certificate of attendance, which you can use for CPD purposes, and also a short survey. And I really would, I'm the marketing director at RM, and I rely heavily on research, on feedback. So please do take the time to fill in the survey to tell us what it was like for you, what we can do better next time, and really just to help us be a learning organization. I'd also encourage you all to stick around for the next session, which is coming up at 1 o'clock. So any second now, which is the Power of the Art Room with Andrea Zafiraku, MBE. Andrea will be sharing some powerful stories from her art room, showcasing the transformational superpowers that the arts have on young people, which sounds amazing, and I'm certainly going to join that one. You'll have full access to all of the content that you've seen today and throughout the summit for the next 3 months. So please do access that, and thank you for attending.